While we tend to view the Black Death in terms of just the disease and symptoms itself, the pandemic's implications stretches much farther and deeper into medieval European society. It impacted European society, one medically, economically, and sociopolitically. Firstly, the Black Death had a marked impact on the genetics and the group psychology of Europeans, and it achieved such impacts by spreading very quickly and killing off about a third of the population. It spread extremely quickly and killed very fast. There are stories of people who went to bed okay and didn't wake up in the morning and were found dead. Um, the uh, this dying off the population, roughly a third, because of the Black Death, um, made it so that about a third of the gene pool was eliminated, which allowed for uh, mutations or mutations throughout the general population to arise. And one of these mutations was a boosted immune system, which allowed Europeans to be protected more from HIV, smallpox, and other diseases. And this allowed them to have smallpox, but have a milder case of it. And the general dying off the population also meant the that all modern Europeans that if you go back far enough, um, that their common ancestor can be found in around this era of the Black Death, or around 1400, as Stephen Olson says, quote, all Europeans alive today have among their ancestors the same man or woman who lived around 1400. The Black Death also had a huge psychological impact, and this can be seen in their art and literature, where they took a very morbid turn, uh, and with tons of pessimism for obvious reasons. And because of this pessimism and morbid kind of humor, uh, there was kind of two movements that happened. One, where people became more pious, to try to atone for their sins, or people just started not caring at all, and just because life is so bad because of the Black Death, so they just indulged themselves um, over and over again. So those were the two kind of movements that came out of it. So the Black Death had some long term in or on a long enough scale, some good economic impacts by increasing wages for workers, and it changed Europe's approach to agriculture. So the Black Death, in the short term, just upended the entire economy and turned it upside down. And the general death of the population just made it, uh, just eroded the strict hereditary class and hierarchy to the point where it was on the verge of collapse. And and because so many people were dying, people were becoming scarce for workers, and this put them in a better position. As Leonard Curry says, quote, the demand for people to work the land was so high that it threatened the manorial holdings. Serfs were no longer tied to one master. And because of the serfs' improved position, they were able to, be uh, demand higher wages without fear of retaliation, and demand better um, pay and other benefits. But the landholders, or the major landholders, uh, either went around this somewhat by shifting their focus in agriculture. So before the Black Death, I think the main staple was grain, and that was, a lot of labor intensive and required a lot of people. But during the Black Death and after it, after the wages just skyrocketed, it meant that they had to renegotiate with the workers, and they had to provide better wages and better conditions, or else the workers will leave to find lords who will. And that meant that grain, their main staple before the Black Death, became extremely pricey and even unprofitable. So they started to shift towards sheep, which required less workers and wasn't as labor intensive, because a shepherd is an easier job than a worker in some areas and aspects. So finally, the Black Death drastically changed the social and political structures in Europe, especially with society's perceptions towards Jewish communities. So, so the Black Death changed a lot of social norms, including being able to change inheritance laws, which allowed daughters to inherit property, and they also allowed people, uh, the central authority of monarchs, to allow or to put like taxes basically on exports and imports. And serfdom was basically given the death blow by the Black Death because so many people died or were moving into the cities for more work. Because in just like Britain alone, there were like 1,300 abandoned towns, and serfdom is a country. It's a country system, and if you don't have people in towns, you can't have serfdom. So, but also with the Black Death came a religious fanaticism and anti-Semitism, and they chose the Jews as the scapegoat for the Black Death because of the Jewish or the Jews' cultural and lifestyle practices and their differences, including higher like hygiene standards, and also being them, Jews also being isolated basically or self-quarantined in ghettos. They were hit less hard, which raised suspicion that they were the cause of it, and so there were accusations that the Jews like intentionally uh, poisoned wells to make the disease spread, and so European mobs started to attacking Jewish communities. And by 1351, 60 major and 150 smaller communities were destroyed. And 350 separate massacres had occurred during that time. And so, after the Black Death, as Dan Friedman says, quote, by the time of the plague, Jews were perceived as enemies, pretty obviously, by their basically localized genocides of them. So, while we tend to view the Black Death in terms of just the disease and symptoms, the pandemics of the Black Death in the 14th century and its implications stretches much farther and deeper into medieval European society by drastically changing Europeans' perception uh, on on medicine, on the economy, and also on the socio-political scale. Thank you.